This is Demetria Spinrad.
And this is Isaac Meyer.
And you're listening to Criminal Records Podcast about some of the weirdest cases in true crime history. And let me say, our case today might not be the weirdest we've ever covered because we are fresh off
we set
our
a high
Poison
bar on
Enema
that
episode. But it is definitely one of the most audacious scams that I have done to date. And you know I love an audacious scam.
I do love a conman who aims high. You know, they say shoot for the moon, and if you miss, you'll land among the stars. And I can't wait to see someone who just believed in themselves so hard that they did some real good fraud.
Well, this guy did not quite attempt to steal the moon. He only attempted to steal some of the richest parts of Arizona. He attempted, as a matter of fact, to make himself the Baron of Arizona.
That really just makes me think of the Arrested Development line about I'd rather be dead in California than alive in Arizona.
Oh, we're gonna talk quite a bit about what makes Arizona valuable in this episode. So most of my information in this episode comes from E.H. Cookridge's book, which is unsurprisingly called The Baron of Arizona, because when you have a title like that, you really want to play it up. That is the title that Reavis is best known by if you go looking for him these days. Although surprisingly, he's not very well known at all. I was kind of shocked by how few recent publications I could find about him. There was one movie made about him in the 50s, but as far as I could tell, nothing since then, which is shocking. So if anyone feels inspired to create art based on this particular con, I think we can make this guy a household name again.
All right, well, take me through this story. Let's go on this journey together.
Because we're a history podcast, before we go on the journey of James Addison Reavis, we are going to have to lay some groundwork, pun, because this is about a very large stretch of ground, to explain how the land that James Reavis tried to steal became part of America in the first place. Because we are talking about the Arizona and New Mexico territories. And if you didn't grow up in the American Southwest, chances are good that you didn't get a very detailed education on the early history of these territories. And I wanted to go into that a bit because it is so much wilder than I realized.
I mean, I'm guessing we stole them all from someone at gunpoint.
Oh boy, did we. Quite literally at gunpoint. So, in brief, in the 1800s, Britain and America are not the only countries that lay claim to bits and pieces of the North American continent. Over the course of the 19th century, the United States expand by buying some territories, negotiating for others, and straight up annexing some land that it happens to like. So first up in the early 1800s is the Louisiana Purchase, in which America doubles in size by purchasing land from France. In the mid-1800s, Britain and America hash out their borders, and Britain stops claiming the Oregon Territory. Although if you've listened to our Pig War episode, you know there are some pretty funny complications that come up with that land as well. In 1868, America buys Alaska from Russia in a real steal of a deal. But the fate of the territory that had belonged to the Spanish Empire gets quite complicated. Because Mexico begins a very messy process of becoming independent from Spain in 1810. It takes over a decade of conflict before the Declaration of Independence of the Mexican Empire is drafted on September 28th, 1821. And then it takes years of conflict after that between a military-appointed hereditary emperor and rebels who want a republic, followed by more conflict between federalists and centralists, before things really shake out in Mexico. During this complicated political period for Mexico, a bunch of people in the U.S. see some opportunity. 30,000 U.S. immigrants decide to move into Texas. The Mexican government tries to stop this in 1830 by closing the borders. That's right, before Americans were making a big deal about keeping Mexican immigrants out, Mexico had to make a big deal out of keeping American immigrants out.
Those goddamn Americans always coming over here. And, well, maybe we did literally steal, I guess, a big chunk of their land. So, yeah, keep them all out. It seemed like trouble.
I gotta say, in this case, Mexico did have a pretty good point. Because in 1836, Texans responded to an attempt by the Mexican government to remove states' rights by declaring themselves an independent republic. So remember, even though this land is owned by Mexico, a huge number of the occupants are American citizens who've decided to just peel it off for themselves. They actually do succeed in holding their own militarily against the Mexican army in 1836, and they win their independence. But being an independent state is a pretty awkward situation for Texas. They are sandwiched between the United States, which is very much in its Manifest Destiny era, and Mexico, which is continuing to treat Texas as a province in rebellion and not an independent nation. Joining the United States as a state would be the preferable option for all of these Texans who were actually just U.S. citizens who decided to move into this territory. So America's in a pretty awkward spot regarding Texas. They want that sweet, sweet territory that is already occupied by its own citizens, but annexing land that belongs to a different country that still lays claim is going to create some conflict. Plus, the U.S. and Mexico disagree on which river marks the southern border of Texas. So if the U.S. decides Texas is ours now, it also might end up carving off a slice of what Mexico claims is not even part of Texas. U.S. President James K. Polk annexes Texas in 1845, and then he approaches Mexico with an offer to buy California as well and negotiate where the boundary falls for Texas. Mexico's like, absolutely not. That's our land, and rejects that offer. And when that offer is rejected, what does the U.S. president do but decide to do things the American way? He moves a bunch of troops onto the disputed territory and says, mine now.
I mean, what's more American than seeing something you like and being like, I'm just going to take that?
Mexico understandably takes the movement of a bunch of foreign troops onto land that is supposed to be theirs as an act of aggression, and sends its own troops to fight the invading Americans. President Polk is then able to declare that American blood has been spilled on American soil, and thus begins the Mexican-American War. And Mexico does not have a good time in this war. American forces run right through not only the territory they are actually claiming, they end up capturing Mexico City. So when it comes time to sign the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, Mexico is not in a good position to negotiate terms. They not only have to give up Texas, they lose huge chunks of territory comprising some or all of what we now know as Utah, Nevada, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Oklahoma, bits of Colorado, Kansas, and Wyoming. That is a total loss of 525,000 square miles of land. For the record, the total mileage of Mexico today is 761,600 square miles of land. So that is a very hefty chunk of territory for the brand new nation of Mexico to lose.
Yeah, one imagines that would engender some ill feeling, but it's okay. We're all past that. We have no problematic relationships with Mexico at all. And it's not like, members of a major political party in this country are now calling for America to invade Mexico or anything like that.
Well, 500,000 square miles of land is nice. But wouldn't it be nice to have even more land? As a little cherry on top, as a little garnish to all that land it just took, in 1854, America signs a treaty for what's known as the Gadsden Purchase. So it pays $10 million to snap up roughly 30,000 more square miles in southern Arizona and New Mexico to make those nice straight lines that we recognize as the borders today. All of this expansion is very, very good for the United States, but it comes with a little bit of a problem. Because this is not empty territory, and land is not just owned on a national level. Individual citizens of what was Mexico, now America, own some of this land. And it gets more complicated. Many people living on this land have land grants from the Mexican government, but a lot of them actually have land grants from all the way back in the period when this land was owned by Spain before Mexico got its independence. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and the Gadsden Treaty both say that the American government must honor these land grants even though they were issued by other nations. Basically, if you bought it, you own it, even if you didn't buy it from America. This is not exactly the digital age. America does not have a speedy way of contacting the governments of other nations to check that they did indeed issue a land grant decades or maybe even over a century ago. So they have to trust that if you have the documents, you own the land. Enter our criminal, James Addison Reavis, who has spotted a pretty obvious flaw in this system.
And that's why you always got to keep your receipts, folks.
So I know this is a lot more detail than we usually go into. I'm making this a two-parter just because there are so many delicious little details that I could not fit into a single episode. I really wanted to talk about his rise to a life of crime because it is so hilariously petty. James's father was a Welsh immigrant to Missouri, but his mother was descended from Scottish and Spanish immigrants. He grew up with her reading Spanish romantic stories to him and his siblings. And at age 18, Reavis enlists in the Confederate Army. Now, you might have noticed, he lived in Missouri. Not a lot of Missouri boys ended up fighting for the South. Reavis made that choice after a skirmish between the Union and Confederate Army resulted in his family's store burning down. So he had a grudge against the Union Army for that. He had absolutely, as far as we can tell, no idealistic reason for joining the Confederate side. It turns out that 18-year-olds who enlist in civil wars to avenge the family store do not make very good soldiers. But there's one thing that Reavis discovers he is exceptionally good at in the army, and that is forging his commanding officer's handwriting and signature. Reavis uses this newfound skill to create military passes for himself, which he uses to give himself vacations from the army and visit his mother. And he decides to go ahead and turn this skill into a business. He sells forged passes to other soldiers who'd prefer to do a little bit less soldiering.
You know, he's not the first person we know of who got his start as a con artist during the Civil War. It seems like this was a really kind of an up-and-coming moment for a lot of big American con men. Also, I do love the idea of an army pass and being like, oh, Army had a half day today.
That's really what he was doing. He was doing the Arrested Development thing of just coming home from the army whenever he felt like it.
And you got to get your own bits. Come on. I say quoting Arrested Development.
So he decides eventually to expand his forgery business because he realizes that he can also forge requisition papers. And that means that he can order provisions on the army's behalf from traders and farmers and then sell the items that he requisitioned himself at a discount. So he's creating papers that say, oh yeah, the Confederate Army is totally going to pay you if you give me all of these supplies. And then he turns around and sells the supplies himself, and the Confederate Army has to pay for the supplies that he has stolen.
It's the perfect crime. Except when someone starts looking at your receipts.
And honestly, we on this podcast say that defrauding the Confederate Army is an awesome thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, technically, I think this makes him an American hero.
So he deserts and re-enlists in the Confederate Army a few times, maybe because he is looking for particularly lax commanding officers, maybe to prevent those officers from noticing his scheme, maybe just because this was a practice known at the time as bounty jumping that quite a lot of our con artists actually did, where you would enlist, because the Confederate Army was so desperate for soldiers, you would enlist, get your bounty, and then hop off and enlist somewhere else and get a new bounty.
The bounty in this case being like a bonus for signing up.
Yeah, he's basically enlisting under a bunch of different names to get his signing bonus from a lot of different regiments. But it is clear that the tide of war is turning against the Confederacy, and Reavis is smart enough to know that he needs to be on the winning side. So he makes up some fake furlough papers, allowing himself leave to go get married. And with those papers, what he does instead of getting married is he leaves his army's camp, he heads straight to the Union Army, and he enlists in the Union Army.
Well, you know, at least he knows how to pick a winner.
It turns out that the Union Army is a little bit better organized than the Confederate Army, and they catch on to his requisition scheme pretty quickly. So he deserts and he decides it's time to get out of the country for a while. He heads down to Brazil for a bit, where he picks up some conversational Portuguese, which is going to serve him well in his later scam attempts. And then in his early 20s, he ends up in St. Louis. And like a lot of people in their early 20s, he tries his hand at a variety of jobs he doesn't enjoy very much. There is one business, though, that's absolutely booming as America heads into the 1870s, and that is real estate. America has recently acquired a hell of a lot of brand new to us real estate, and Americans are moving out west in record numbers. While other Americans are taking advantage of land grant programs to manifest their destiny, Reavis comes up with another way of profiting off of these boom times.
I just love the idea of like these old pioneer guys, but they're like just sitting around being like, I'm manifesting. I'm not taking the Oregon Trail. I'm manifesting across the Oregon Trail. I'm just going to write it in my wish book.
You just wait a minute and we are going to talk about a prospector who manifested so hard.
Well, I'm glad to hear that he's in touch with the things that he wanted. Let's go on this journey.
So Reavis is the kind of guy who knows that when there's a gold rush, you want to be the one who's selling the shovels. Instead of becoming a homesteader himself, he goes into real estate investing. His specific goal was that he wanted to be rich enough to never have to work a manual labor job like his father. So he might have signed up to fight for the family store, but he certainly didn't want to work in the family store. He also wants to marry his childhood sweetheart, a lady named Ada Pope. All of this seems to be within his grasp. But when he gets into the business of handling land claims for clients, that old temptation to use his forgery skills flares up again. Dealing with land claims can be frustrating work, even today in the age of digital records. In the 1800s, it often means going through generations of documents created by families who might not have been the most literate, accomplished at surveying, or inclined to put handshake agreements into the written record. Reavis gives in to the temptation to save himself some work and assure a good outcome for his client by finding a lost document from the 1700s. His previous forgeries were of documents that an officer might have written hours or days ago. You can just steal some paper and ink. But forging old documents means you don't have to just imitate old-timey handwriting. You have to artificially age the paper and ink. There is an art to this. Some enterprising criminals still do this today, but it is harder to get away with today now that we have techniques like carbon dating. Back in the day, you could do things like use vegetable juice or tea to make a piece of paper look older and more yellowed and brittle than it actually was.
A tea trick was what I learned in school when they taught us how to make old-timey looking documents because they were preparing us for a life of crime. Or just wanted a craft project.
What is forgery but a very elaborate craft project?
In a certain sense, didn't he earn an A+?
And Reavis is using his crafting skills to get everything he wants. He is right on the verge of having it all. And then a man comes to him with a story that changes the course of his life. That man is Dr. George Maurice Willing Jr. Dr. Willing has had an absolutely fascinating life up to this point. He began his career in Philadelphia as a doctor, but had to move out west in a hurry after he was found to be performing and sometimes botching abortions. He spent some time as a prospector. He went around the West selling dubious aphrodisiacs, mesmeric balsam, and hair-restoring tonics. He campaigned as a delegate for the Jefferson Territory. He became a lobbyist, and so he claims he coined the name Idaho after a girl he knew named Ida.
And was she, in fact, a hoe?
I think she was a young girl. He lied to the U.S. government, actually, and said that it was a Shoshone word, and the U.S. government did not ask any Shoshone speakers before naming the territory Idaho, and only realized years later that that was not actually a word.
And that's why you always have to check the sources in the Wikipedia articles, everyone. Never just believe.
So Dr. Willing has a very interesting story after a very interestingly lived life. He claims that years ago, he paid a substantial amount in gold dust and nuggets and prospecting equipment to purchase a claim for 2,000 square miles of land from an elderly Mexican man named Miguel Peralta. He shows Reavis papers that do appear to originate in the late 18th century Spanish government and thus should be honored under the treaties that the Mexican government made with the U.S. government. But Dr. Willing has a problem. His land deal went down at an isolated mining spot, not exactly the kind of place where you can find a notary. All he can produce as proof that he is the legitimate owner of these papers and thus of the land is a bit of wrapping paper with grease pencil writing on it. He has not officially registered his claim, and he urgently needs Reavis to help him out with this. Why is Dr. Willing suddenly so eager to authenticate papers he's been holding on to for years? Probably because he is broke, and he needs to be able to cough up this authentic land grant as security so he can get loans. Dr. Willing enlists the help of a lawyer named William Gitt, locally known as Spanish Land Grant Gitt because he presents himself as an expert on Spanish land grants and is known for bending the facts in service of his clients. And Reavis and Gitt are two guys in real estate who end up getting along like a house on fire. Gitt deals in disputes involving iffy land claims. Reavis has a way of finding just the right papers to prove land claims. They are a real dynamic duo. Meanwhile, Dr. Willing is a very erratic man. He drinks and uses drugs very heavily. He is prone to mysterious disappearing spells. His long-suffering wife, Mary Ann Willing, ends up becoming a sort of surrogate mother figure to the polite young James Reavis, who has a whole lot of questions about her husband's land grant.
I mean, I bet he would. Upstanding man like that, real trustworthy character.
This nice, polite young fellow who has this office job, and he's just so very interested in the ins and outs of land grant law. The late 1800s were a period of a lot of financial ups and downs in America. Reavis loses almost all of the property he's been investing in during the 1873 financial crash, when he panics and he sells at the lowest point of his property's dip in value. If he'd held onto it, it would have recovered, but he did not hold onto it. He panicked.
Someone should have been on Wall Street bets.
And then he further compounded his problems by indulging a little too freely in his side fraud business, and he ends up catching the attention of local law enforcement. So Reavis has nothing left to lose and a very good reason to get out of St. Louis. So he decides that chasing down Dr. Willing's claim to the Peralta land grant seems like a way to get back the money he's lost and more.
You know, I can see where the logic here follows, but I do want to raise one question for you. Is there ever a bad reason to get out of St. Louis?
Not a St. Louis fan,
I wouldn't say that I am. Apologies to the anyone listening who's from the great city of St. Louis. My only experience there was the airport and being harassed by an airport preacher while I was waiting for my flight. So it did not really sell me on the experience.
But you were going west, right?
That is true. I technically did. I do the one thing you were supposed to do in St. Louis, which is leave St. Louis to go west.
Yeah, St. Louis did exactly what it's set up to do in your case. And James Reavis does exactly the same thing. Shortly after he marries Ada Pope, he abandons her and he goes west. First, he sails to San Francisco, planning to deal with some mining claims on the Peralta land grant. And when he lands there, he actually has to take the long way around, all the way down around South America. It's a horrible trip. He gets really sick on the way there. And then when he finally lands in San Francisco, he gets the news that Dr. Willing is dead. That's right. The man whose claim everything hinged on arrived in Prescott, Arizona. He filed his claim in the county courthouse, and the very next morning he is found dead.
You could say the spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak.
Dr. Willing's flesh, after a very long time abusing drugs and questionable aphrodisiacs, was really quite weak. There are a few rumors about the circumstances of his death being unnatural. To be honest with you, that man lived very hard. He had just had a long journey followed by an exciting day. He probably just died of natural causes. So Reavis is stuck in California. Dr. Willing was the one who had all the documents he needed to pursue this claim, because remember, he had to file the claim, he had to show the documents at the courthouse. So he's just kind of stuck at this point, and he doesn't really have the funds to pack up and go home. So for 2 years, he bounces around California, taking any jobs he can get. And now that he is at the center of the territory that Mexico has given up, he starts getting a sense of just how easy it is to convince the Private Land Claims Commission that you have a valid Spanish or Mexican land grant. To get a sense of the scope of what the Private Lands Claim Commission has to deal with, in just 1 year, they had to hear 800 claims covering 20 million acres of land. And remember, each claim is going to be based on old and often incomplete documents. The commission does not exactly have the luxury of thoroughly investigating each and every case. If you want to do an investigation, you have to pay a steep fee to the judges and officials who will search for and translate your Spanish documents. In other words, you're pretty much just bribing a judge to investigate your case and tell you the outcome.
I know what you're talking about. This seems like a completely foolproof system to me.
So while Reavis is circulating around California, learning a bit about the ins and outs of local real estate, he takes a job at a newspaper. He actually becomes an advertising and subscription canvasser for the San Francisco Examiner newspaper, so his job is to go around looking for businesses who will buy ads in a paper that is not doing so well locally. It turns out that Reavis is very, very good at talking people into things. He wins over some high-profile business owners and convinces them to buy advertisements. But this job is serving a purpose for him, because what he actually wants to do is network with the business owners. In the process of selling these advertisements, he makes some very useful connections among San Francisco's wealthy elite. And some of these people are intrigued by the stories that Reavis is telling them about the Peralta grant, because Reavis is spreading news about this land grant quite widely. These men have their own reasons for hoping that Reavis's wild story is correct, because they are railroad tycoons, and this is the age of the train. So Reavis gets in good with the owners of the Southern Pacific Transportation Company. What he's telling them is that if he can successfully defend his claim on the land, he will give exclusive rail rights to them. This is a big deal. The thing about trains is that you need to be able to build the tracks. Rail tycoons are out there building competing lines across the country that only their own trains can run on. So the right to build tracks on the most desirable routes are so valuable that there are conflicts, usually legal, but actually sometimes violent conflicts called railroad wars over the best territory. Blocking your competitor out of a huge chunk of Arizona can be very, very good for business. So Southern Pacific is very interested in what Reavis can offer them. All they have to do is sign a contract for $50,000, and Reavis will block their competitors from building rail lines on this land that he swears he totally owns. He just has to go find these documents that a dead guy dropped off somewhere.
I feel like you could do a lot of damage by selling those rights to several different railway companies and then just disappearing.
Oh, sir, you think too small.
You
dream too small,
that's
sir.
Too small?
We are not even close to the wildest part of the scam.
All right, I'm liking this.
So obviously, Reavis is omitting the part of the story where he doesn't actually have the documents, and also the part of the story where Dr. Willing has a wife who should be the rightful owner if the claim is real. But not to worry, Reavis is just going to forge any supporting documents that he can't find. He doesn't get all the money he asked his rich new friends for, but he does end up getting enough to travel to Arizona to check out his chances of making a play for the land and filing his own claim. So in 1880, Reavis makes a trip to Arizona. He tells people he's a subscription agent for the Examiner, but his real goal is going around the country, introducing himself to prominent people, saying that he works for the newspaper, but actually going around trying to figure out where Dr. Willing dropped off the documents before he died. And he actually does find them. He does find Dr. Willing's documents. He returns to San Francisco with those documents and notes that the doctor had taken before he dies. But when he examines them, he realizes Dr. Willing's claim is complete bullshit. There is no record in his notes of him paying a man named Miguel Peralta anything. In fact, there's no proof that they ever met at all, or that Miguel Peralta was ever a real guy. It is true that he does possess some kind of land grant, but the documents that he has are for a floating Spanish grant. Grants like these were issued by the Spanish government to let people possess a certain amount of territory, but they don't say what territory specifically, meaning they're functionally worthless in the American legal system. You can't show up at an American court saying you have a Spanish document that just lets you grab any land you feel like. You need documents saying this land was given to this specific family at this time. So if Reavis wants to claim any territory in Arizona, he is going to need to invent new documents entirely. So with a promise of very generous payment if the U.S. government accepts his claim, he does manage to wheedle Dr. Willing's widow into signing away her rights to him. And then he goes traveling around North America. He visits some cities in Mexico, and he carefully examines the kind of documents he's trying to forge. And some of those documents just so happen to leave the archives with him in his briefcase.
I, for one, am shocked that a man who would forge documents would also not respect the sanctity of the legal archive.
Back in San Francisco, he examines his treasure trove of very old papers, and he starts working on producing brand new documents that look exactly like these very old documents. And in addition to creating these documents, he is going to have to create the family that owns the land and thus was given the land in these documents. He creates a whole fake lineage for the Peralta family to explain how they managed to get a huge chunk of land passed down for him. I'm about to pronounce a very long Spanish name. I do not pronounce Spanish very well at all, so apologies for how I'm about to mangle the name of this totally real man. So he creates a man named Don Miguel Nemesio Silva de Peralta y de la Cerdoba, a distant relative of King Philip IV of France and Navarre. A family this distinguished is going to need more than a crudely sketched family tree. They are going to have a lot of documents about their lives because this is a very esteemed noble family. So Reavis produces documents about Don Miguel's military service in New Spain. He creates an entirely fake career that is so distinguished that King Ferdinand VI grants him an estate of 300 square leagues in the Barony, Arizonac, and de los Colorados. And Reavis does not skimp on this forgery. He creates a lot of documents about Don Miguel dealing with the headache of Spanish bureaucracy and having to travel around and establish his claim to the estate. So, writing in archaic Spanish on stolen paper treated with acids to remove the previous writing, he forges not just the documents regarding the land grant itself, but he forges years of correspondence and paperwork from Don Miguel and his descendants.
Such a rich, textured universe he's building here.
Yeah, the Peralta document universe is wild, and it's going to get even wilder. He has so much evidence. He produces possibly even more evidence than he needs. His prolific production of evidence ends up being part of what brings him down. The barons of Arizona have great paperwork, but they just have terrible luck. They always just manage to miss out on officially claiming their vast estate due to some kind of misfortune. And it is a vast estate. The barons of Arizona have been granted by the Spanish government 12,500,000 acres in total. And not just any acres, some primo acres for Arizona. Reavis is laying claim to land that contains the Gila, Salt, San Pedro, and San Carlos rivers. So in the middle of a desert, owning the water rights can make you very rich. But if farming's not your style, how about mining? The land grant that Reavis has forged just so happens to sit on a massive mineral belt with silver, coal, and anthracite deposits. And if you prefer the urban life, what a coincidence! The Peralta grant happens to encompass the towns of Florence, Globe, Solomonville, Silver City, and a little town you might have heard of called Phoenix.
I mean, in fairness, if someone really wants it, I suppose they can just have it.
Hey, there are many lovely things in Phoenix,
Are
like
there?
Air conditioning.
Ways to leave Phoenix?
So, Reavis has the paperwork about this very conveniently located barony of Arizona. And he has those documents from Dr. Willing's widow saying that he was the one who gets to claim all that land. He shows these to his powerful railroad tycoon associates in San Francisco, and they totally believe him. They give him money for exclusive rail rights because, being the only guy who gets to run railroad tracks to Phoenix, Arizona, that can make you very rich. So, $50,000 richer, he heads to Arizona to try to claim his land in 1882. Claiming land is a complicated process. First step is giving copies of the deeds that he now claims he owns to a courthouse. But this is actually going to have to work its way, kind of percolate all the way up to the federal government. And Reavis understands that if he is going to pull off a scam this big, he has to get the media on his side. So in October, he starts showing his documents to reporters in Arizona. He doesn't yet officially register his claim, but he makes sure everyone knows he's thinking very, very hard about registering his claim.
This is a man who seems like, for the amount of work he's putting in, he could have made a pretty legitimate living on, a real job. He's got a solid work ethic.
That is exactly something that E.H. Cookridge says in his book. He's like, I don't understand why this guy worked so hard on not working a real job when he could have just worked a real job and made a lot of money. Although he wasn't a great actual legal investor either, so...
I'm sure you could figure out some, basic insurance fraud as a backup. You don't need to, buy all of or a good chunk of Arizona. There's middle ground. You can work your way up.
So can I try to sell you on scamming your way into a big chunk of Arizona? Can I give you a little get rich quick
Sure.
scheme?
Do I have to live in Arizona?
You don't. That's
okay, ideal. Perfect. How do I do this?
No offense to Arizona, which there are some really beautiful parts of Arizona. It has a rich and lovely history.
I have limited experience in Arizona, and it's mostly been pretty weird, so a little offense to Arizona. I'm sure other people have had better experiences than me.
Well, in the days before air conditioning, modern transit, and utility companies in far-flung areas, not a lot of settlers really wanted to move to Arizona. It was, we live in the Pacific Northwest, which is where everybody wanted to manifest their destiny. A lot more water up here. But Reavis knows this land is not very valuable for settlers, but it's very valuable for mining companies. He knows that very few claims regarding Spanish land grants have made it all the way through the very slow federal process of going from the U.S. Surveyor General to the Secretary of the Interior to Congress. Here's the bit that makes the whole plan come together. He doesn't just want to settle in on a huge patch of unfarmable desert. At least not yet. Later, he gets a little too big for his britches and he starts making big plans to develop the desert. But not yet. This is the first stage of the scam, back when he is still thinking small. So long as he can use the media to keep people convinced that he might own the land, he can go to people who are already farming or mining the land and threaten to collect rent. And he can work them up so much about the fear that they might lose their land to the rightful owner of it that they will pay for a quitclaim.
No, I haven't heard that term before. A quitclaim?
Yes, a quitclaim deed. You have not been granted large swaths of land by any of your family members.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
This is most commonly these days it is used if you're gifting land to someone, you use something called a quitclaim deed. What it is a special type of deed, which is a legal document transferring property between people. As the name might suggest, a quitclaim happens when a person quits their claim on a piece of property. So quitclaim deeds are designed to transfer property quickly and without much in the way of inspecting who is actually supposed to own the property. The buyer of a quitclaim deed is not legally guaranteed a clear title. All they are guaranteed when they buy a quitclaim is that the person selling the quitclaim has quit their claim. That was a fun sentence to say fast. So Reavis starts approaching people who live on the land he's claiming he owns in 1883. He says, look, this is actually my land. I could kick you off it, but I'm a generous guy and I hate to kick people off land, so let's make a deal. If you pay me, I will give you one of these quitclaim deeds, and you can go back to your business with a legal document saying that I'm not going to come after your property, which I probably could if you don't pay me. Hint, hint.
That's a brilliant scam, actually.
So this is why Reavis goes to the media and not the courts of law first with his land grant. He doesn't actually need the physical land for this scam to work. He just needs to get people so worked up that they will pay for him to basically sell back their own land. He even generously offers to issue deeds of perpetual tenancy to folks who pay him rent for the land.
Oh, what a kind overlord.
What a generous man he is. So in the summer of 1883, not long after he formally registers his claim with the U.S. Surveyor General, he scores his first big hit. He reels in his first big fish with this quitclaim scam. The president of the Silver King Mining Company finds him convincing enough that he pays Reavis $25,000 for a quitclaim deed. So let's take a look at how Reavis is climbing the ladder here. So he starts off scamming the railroad companies out of money to go investigate the claim. And then he uses the fact that the railroad companies believe him to go to the media and say, these companies believe me, so I'm going to start selling the quitclaim deeds. And then he uses the fact that he sells a quitclaim deed to a very distinguished mining company to say, look, this mining company has really good lawyers. If they believe me, it must be legitimate. So everybody else on this land should pay me too.
It seems like kind of the underpinning of all good confidence schemes, right? Like you just need to convince one person, then you can turn that into a cascade chain reaction of, well, they believe me, so you should too.
Absolutely. All of this is happening outside of the courts of law. No U.S. official has made any kind of ruling about who owns this land. All of this is just a snowball effect of Reavis suggesting that he maybe could own the land. So to sell the story even more, Reavis finds some convenient ancient ruins way out in Arizona, and he builds a fake family home for the Peraltas. And of course, a family as illustrious as the Peraltas needs a 10-room mansion. The Palace of Arizola, as he calls it, has to look convincingly like the kind of house that Spanish barons would live in. In addition to building his palace, he starts hiring agents and rent collectors, and he has them go and hassle the people on his land for money. He has them put up posters announcing that anyone who doesn't pay up will be, quote, liable to litigation for trespassing and expulsion where the Peralta grant is, as it must be, validated by the U.S. government, end quote. Those who pay up, and many local farmers and business owners do get very official-looking deeds from Reavis and his disbarred, but who's checking, lawyer. Some of them even pay. They get a document that they don't really understand, but they think is legit. And then Reavis's agents approach them again, claiming that it was only a partial payment and they owe more money. So he goes to the people who he's scammed once and says, now I've identified a sucker, and scams them again. And this is definitely one of the scummiest parts of Reavis's operation. We'll get to some of his biggest scams against the wealthiest folks in the next episode, but in this part of the operation, he is having his agents harass and in some cases quite badly rough up a lot of very poor farmers who really don't have a lot of legal recourse.
I mean, I, for one, am shocked that this con man would behave with such flagrant disrespect for the rights of others.
Yeah, it turns out that he is not such a benevolent landlord after all, and a whole lot of people end up paying up out of fear. The exact amount that a con artist takes in is often really hard to determine after the fact. Surprisingly, con artists aren't particularly interested in the government going through their books, but from later things that Reavis revealed, during the early part of his scam in the 1880s, he probably took in something in the $100,000 range, maybe $200,000 when you count his payments from the Southern Pacific and the King Silver Mine.
And that's unadjusted for inflation?
Unadjusted for inflation.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah. That's, should I go to the inflation calculator? Should we do currency conversion?
Yeah, let's do some live currency conversion. This is what the people come for.
Other true crime podcasts describe the murder details. We described the currency conversion details. So, $100,000 in 1880.
In the meantime, folks, remember, this is the importance of math. All right? Pay attention in math class, do your times tables, and you too could become a famous conman one day because you'll know how much the money you've stolen is worth.
That's worth about $3 million today. So he took in about $3 to $6 million in today's money.
And this is about stage 1 of the con.
This is stage 1 of the con. In stage 2 of the con, which we're going to get into next week, that's when he takes in what he estimates was the full amount of money, which is probably about $5,300,000 in late 1800s money.
All right. Well, again, as we started the episode, shoot for the moon.
So around this time, Reavis starts getting a little big for his britches, as one would if one was making $3 to $6 million worth of income on basically just a bunch of forged papers and some clever media appearances. He even starts talking about what it would take for the U.S. government to pay him to renounce his claim to all of the land. And he is asking for just a modest few $100 million. He even finds a Republican nominee for Congress who agrees to support the scheme, although the plan falls apart when a Democrat not only wins the election, but becomes something of a political nemesis to Reavis. The Surveyor General's office sends a Spanish language expert to Mexico to try to locate documents about the land, but unfortunately, they let Reavis go with the expert. And while they're searching through the document archive in Mexico together, Reavis happens to be the one to discover a crucial document proving his claim.
Oh, I wonder how that got there. Also, just to point out, clearly, Democrats, not the party of free enterprise. They just bring down our entrepreneurs.
And stop us from claiming Mexican land.
Party boobers. I can't even say that with a straight face.
Obviously, not everyone believes Reavis's claims. Arizona newspapers really lead the fight against him. I wanted to read a list of some of the things they call him besides the Baron of Arizona because they got really creative with it. Among other things, he got called the Beanpole Baron, Rascally Reavis, the Duke of Arizona, Earl of the Iron Jaw, Count of Confidence, Lord of the Limber Tongue.
I mean, Count of the Iron Jaw is pretty fantastic, honestly.
I kind of like Lord of the Limber Tongue.
Yeah, those all seem like villains I'd put together for my Dungeons and Dragons campaign.
And all of this media attention helps to spur anti-Reavis committees, which are established in several Arizona towns to coordinate resistance against him. This all ends with the Attorney General of Arizona filing a lawsuit that forces Reavis to show the cause of his claims in court. This lawsuit actually isn't too concerning as far as challenging the existence of the Peralta claim. Everyone at this point is assuming that the documents Reavis has produced are real and the Baron of Arizona did exist at some point. So the goal with this lawsuit is to challenge Reavis's rights to the Peralta claim. Reavis realizes that while he has done a great job forging the documents about the existence of the Spanish land grant, the documents proving that he, not the family of Dr. Willing or the fictional Peraltas themselves, should be the legal owner of the Peralta's land, are going to be called into question. And we're going to end the episode here. In our next episode, we are going to talk about what he does to make sure that his claim on that land can't be questioned and what spins out of that particular lie. Because he has invented a family and now he is about to invent a person.
There's a lot of ways this could go, and a few of them are very problematic. I'm very concerned. Well, I guess enjoy that cliffhanger, folks. And apologies to the people of Missouri and Arizona, who I guess I've spent a good chunk of this episode slandering. But in fairness, I mean, if this is part of your state's history, I mean, at least in Washington, you know, we're just, I guess, also founded mostly by conmen.
Sir, I did an entire episode about how Washington almost went to war over the death of one pig that ate somebody's potatoes. We have absolutely no claims to dignity whatsoever.
Operative word, almost.
Well, this guy almost became the Baron of Arizona and then didn't. Which is why we're talking about him on a true crime episode.
Spoilers. Oh my God. How could you spoil the outcome for me?
Spoiler. We're talking about him on a criminal podcast and not a podcast about the massive wealth of his descendants. So yeah, spoiler alert. He does not get away with it.
Aren't all of the wealthy criminals, Demetria? Isn't that the real story?
And if you would like to hear more and see more from us, the Lords of the Limber Tongue, where can people find us?
They can find us at our website, which is facingbackward.com.
We are also on Tumblr, where I post very irregularly. We're Facing Backward on Tumblr. And we're also Facing Backward on Blue Sky, thanks to Jan Leonard, who gave me an invitation.
You can also support us at Patreon. Our Patreon page is patreon.com/facingbackward. And special thanks to our patrons, especially those of you who donated our shout-out tier. They are Jan Leonard of Blue Sky fame, Stephen Elkins, Martin Oliveira, Clark Canning, Ian Kellett, Matt Haynes, Jackie Frostocker, Monkey Sack, Alayla McCulloch, Karen Murphy, Peter Wales, Robert Prine, William Arno, Jonas Brandis, Nicholas Kroll, Jerry Spinrad, Jared Stevens, Jeffrey Dwork, Stefan Hrushka, Joshua Kane, Robbie and Kat, Jacob Key, Aaron Finkbeiner, and Anonymous Anna's Hummingbird, Mark Sai, Gil, Leslie Ikuta, Trash Taste Enjoyer. Don't talk yourself down like that. I'm sure your taste is great. Shimao Toshio's History of Japonesia podcast. A house is a perfectly cromulent mascot. The fish I catch are Rhodes Scholars compared to Samuel Alito, who is a schmuck. And everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Until next time, folks, I don't know, try not to commit too much fraud. Or if you do, make sure it's the Confederacy, because then it's morally upright.